I didn't understand why my hands were shaking until I saw the realtor's sign still planted in the front yard. It was bright white, freshly painted, leaning just slightly to the left like someone had rushed to stick it in. The grass around it was new too, thick, green, trimmed short. Not the dry, patchy lawn I remembered. Not the yard of a woman who, according to my husband, was one missed payment away from losing everything. I sat in my car for a full minute, engine running, staring at that sign like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. This wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't supposed to exist. Just 3 months earlier, my husband had stood in our kitchen, shoulders slumped, voice heavy, and told me his mother needed our savings. Before all of that, my life was ordinary. Not perfect, not exciting, but steady in a way I had learned to value as I got older. I'm 52 years old. I work as a billing coordinator for a small medical practice. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills and gives me health insurance. I've been married to Mark for 26 years. We raised 2 kids who are now grown and living their own lives, checking in with calls that are too short and texts full of emojis instead of words. Our house is modest. Beige siding, creaky steps, a kitchen that smells faintly of coffee no matter how much I scrub. On Sunday mornings, I like to sit at the small table by the window with my mug and listen to the birds fight over the feeder. That kind of life. Quiet. Predictable. Mark and I had our routines. He liked his eggs soft. I liked mine scrambled dry. He watched the news at full volume. I folded laundry with the TV muted. We didn't talk much during the week, not because we were unhappy, but because we knew each other well enough to sit in the same room without filling every silence. His mother, Evelyn, had always been complicated. She lived alone since his father passed away years ago. A proud woman, sharp tongue, always complaining about money even when she didn't seem to be doing that badly. She never liked me much, not openly cruel, just distant in a way that made it clear I was tolerated, not embraced. Still, I tried. I sent birthday cards, I called on holidays, I brought casseroles she barely touched. So when Mark came to me that night with that look on his face, the one he used to have when the kids were sick or when something at work had gone wrong, I didn't immediately question him. He stood at the counter, rubbing his temples, not meeting my eyes. "Mom's in trouble," he said. I set down the dish towel. "What kind of trouble?" "She's behind on her mortgage. A lot. She didn't want to tell me, but she might lose the house." The word lose hung heavy in the air. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that comes when responsibility knocks, whether you're ready or not. "How much?" I asked. He hesitated, just a second too long. "Most of what we have saved." I remember the hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounding too loud, the clock ticking over the stove, my own heartbeat in my ears. That's our retirement," I said quietly. I know, but she's my mother." I didn't say anything right away. I thought of all the nights I worked late, the lunches I packed instead of buying, the vacations we postponed, the envelope in the drawer where I kept our statements neatly stacked like proof of discipline. "She'll pay us back," he added. "When she sells or when things settle, this isn't forever." I looked at his face. He looked tired, worried, like a son afraid of failing his parent. So I said yes. I told myself it was temporary, that family helps family, that I would want our children to do the same for us someday. We transferred the money the next week. I remember sitting at the computer, cursor hovering over the confirmation button, my finger trembling just a little. Mark put his hand on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," he said. I believed him. After that, life went on. Mostly. Mark seemed lighter at first, more relaxed. He called his mother often. Sometimes he stepped outside to talk, which I told myself was just habit. Evelyn didn't call to thank me. That stung, but I pushed it down. Gratitude had never been her strength. Then small things started to feel off. Mark began guarding his phone more closely, not hiding it exactly, just turning the screen away when I passed, smiling at messages he didn't explain. He started making weekend trips to help Mom with paperwork. He came back smelling faintly of new leather and something floral that wasn't her usual perfume. When I asked how she was doing, he'd answer quickly, too quickly. "She's okay now. Things are better." Better how, I wanted to ask, but I didn't. I didn't want to sound suspicious. I didn't want to be that wife. One afternoon, while driving back from visiting a friend, I took a different route home to avoid traffic. That's when I passed her street. I wasn't planning to stop. I just glanced over out of habit. And that's when I saw the new fence. Tall, white, decorative, not cheap. My stomach dropped. I slowed, turned the corner, and there it was, the house I remembered, but not the one I knew. Fresh paint, new windows, landscaping that looked like it came straight out of a magazine, and that realtor's sign still standing proud in the yard. That's when my hands started shaking. I parked across the street and sat there staring, my mind scrambling to make sense of something that didn't fit the story I'd been told. This wasn't survival. This was an upgrade. And I knew in that moment that whatever we had given her, whatever Mark had asked me to sacrifice, it hadn't been for the reason he said. I didn't knock on her door that day. I don't know if it was fear or instinct, but something in me said to wait, to observe, to listen. I drove away slowly, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. The image of that house followed me all the way home, replaying itself in my mind like a cruel slideshow. That night, Mark was already home when I walked in. He was at the stove, humming softly, flipping something in a pan. The smell of garlic and butter filled the kitchen. One of his better moods, clearly. "You're late," he said without turning around. "Traffic," I replied, hanging my purse on the hook by the door. I watched him, the way he moved easily, relaxed, the way his shoulders weren't slumped anymore, the way guilt should have weighed on him, but didn't. We ate dinner at the table, the same one we'd shared for decades. He talked about work. I nodded, chewed slowly. Every word felt like it had to pass through something thick inside me before I could swallow it. Finally, I asked, "How's your mom doing?" He paused just for a heartbeat. "She's okay," he said. "Why?" "No reason. I was just thinking about her." He smiled then, a little too quickly. "She's much less stressed now." Less stressed. I set my fork down. "Mark, did she end up selling the house?" He shook his head. "Not yet." I waited. He didn't say anything else. "So how is she caught up?" I asked. "With the mortgage, I mean." He shrugged. "She's managing." That was it. No details, no gratitude, no mention of the money we no longer had. That night, I lay awake listening to him breathe. The room smelled faintly of his aftershave. The ceiling fan clicked with every rotation. I stared into the dark, replaying every conversation from the last 3 months, every time I'd brushed off a strange feeling because I didn't want to believe it. In the morning, after he left for work, I pulled out the envelope, the one I hadn't touched since we transferred the money. I spread the statements out on the table, smoothing them like they might crease if I didn't treat them gently. The number stared back at me, unchanged. Our savings still gone, no new deposits, no sign of repayment. I called Evelyn. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail. Polite, neutral. "Hi, Evelyn, it's me. Just checking in. Hope you're doing well." She didn't call back. That afternoon, I did something I had never done in my marriage. I logged into Mark's email. I knew his password. He'd used the same one for years, our anniversary spelled backward. I'd never felt the need to look before. It felt invasive, wrong. But so did being lied to. My hands trembled as I scrolled. Mostly work emails, newsletters, spam. Then I saw one from a contractor. The subject line read, "Final invoice, remodel complete." My heart thudded so hard I thought I might be sick. I opened it. The address listed was Evelyn's. The total amount made my vision blur. It was more than half of what we'd given her. Attached were photos. I clicked on one. There was the kitchen. Bright, modern, new appliances. The same house I'd driven past, but now seen from the inside. Not the home of a desperate woman about to lose everything, but the home of someone who had decided to start fresh. I scrolled through more emails. A real estate agent, discussions about market timing, about maximizing value. This wasn't about saving her home. This was about improving it. And Mark knew. I sat back in the chair, my legs weak, the room suddenly too quiet. The refrigerator hummed, a car passed outside. Life going on, completely unaware that something fundamental had cracked inside my chest. I didn't cry. Not yet. That evening, I cooked dinner like always, stirred the pot, set the table. When Mark walked in, he kissed my cheek. "You okay?" he asked. "You seem quiet." "I'm fine," I said. We ate, again. Afterward, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat across from him. The mug warmed my palms. I needed that grounding, something solid. "Mark," I said calmly, "how much did your mom remodel her house with?" He froze, just for a second, but it was enough. "What?" he asked. I saw the contractor invoice. Silence. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, like a man deciding which truth to tell. "She needed to fix things before selling. You can't sell a house like that without investing a little." "A little?" I asked softly. "Mark, that was our retirement." "She's going to sell," he insisted, "and when she does, we'll get it back." "You told me she was about to lose the house," I said. "You told me this was about keeping her afloat." He rubbed his face. "I didn't want to worry you." I felt something harden in me then, not anger, something colder. "You lied," I said. He looked away. "I protected you." "No," I said quietly. "You protected her." He stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "She's my mother, and I'm your wife." He didn't answer. The next few days passed in a strange fog. We moved around each other carefully, like people sharing a space after an accident. Polite, distant. He slept on the couch once, then again. I didn't tell anyone, not my kids, not my friends. I needed to understand the full picture before I decided what to do with it. So I went back to Evelyn's house. This time, I knocked. She opened the door wearing a silk robe, hair freshly styled, nails done. She looked good, better than I'd ever seen her. "Oh," she said, surprise flashing briefly across her face. "You." "Hello, Evelyn," I said. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. The inside smelled like lemon cleaner and something floral. Everything gleamed. New furniture, fresh paint, no signs of struggle anywhere. "You've done well," I said, looking around. She sniffed. "I had to. The market's good right now." I turned to face her. "Mark told me you were about to lose this place." She waved a hand dismissively. "He worries too much." "Did you ask him to take our savings?" I asked. She met my gaze then, cold, appraising. "He offered." "And you didn't think to tell me what you were really doing with it." She smiled thinly.
That wasn't my responsibility. I felt the last of my doubt dissolve. "You're going to sell," I said. "Yes. And when you do, are you planning to pay us back?" She shrugged. "We'll see what's left." I left without another word. That night, I slept in the guest room. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, listening to the house settle, the walls creak, thinking about all the years I'd played fair, trusted, compromised. By morning, I knew what I had to do. Not out of revenge, out of self-respect.
Didn't confront Mark right away. That surprised even me. Instead, I went to work, answered emails, processed claims, smiled at patients I barely heard. I moved through my day like someone carrying a glass bowl filled to the brim, careful not to spill anything before I was ready. Because what I felt wasn't just anger, it was clarity. And clarity needs space. That evening, I stopped by the bank on my way home, the same branch where I'd signed the transfer papers months earlier. The teller recognized me. She asked how I was doing. I said, fine, because that's what women my age are trained to say, even when something inside them is breaking clean in two. I asked questions, quiet ones, about joint accounts, about what could be done and what couldn't, about legal obligations between spouses, about documentation. I went home with a folder tucked under my arm and a weight in my chest that felt heavy but solid, like resolve. Mark was home before me. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. "We need to talk," he said as soon as I walked in. I set my purse down slowly. "I agree." He looked tired, defensive, like a man rehearsing a speech he didn't want to give. "She told you, didn't she?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "She did." He stood up. "I didn't think you'd go over there." "I didn't think you'd lie to me," I replied evenly. He ran a hand through his hair. It wasn't a lie, it was incomplete. I almost laughed at that. Almost. "You took money we saved together," I said, "and gave it to someone who never planned to use it the way you told me she would." "She's selling the house," he insisted again, as if repetition could make it true in the way that mattered. "We'll get something back." "Something," I echoed, "after taxes, after fees, after whatever she decides is left." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since this started, he looked unsure. "I was trying to help her," he said quietly. "And who was helping me?" I asked. He had no answer. That night, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I told him I needed time, space. He nodded, relieved by the calm, not realizing it was the calm before something final. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched. I watched Mark visit his mother more often. I watched him carry groceries into her house, like a dutiful son playing his part. I watched Evelyn post photos online, her fresh beginnings, her fresh chapter, standing in front of a sold sign that replaced the for sale one. The house sold quickly. Of course it did. I found out not from Mark, but from a neighbor who mentioned it casually when I drove by again one afternoon. "She did great," the woman said, "got way over asking." That night, I waited. Mark came home late, shoulders tense. He loosened his tie, avoided my eyes. "She sold the house," he said finally. "I know." "She'll give us some back," he added quickly. "I'll make sure of it." "How much?" I asked. He hesitated. "That depends." "On what?" "On her expenses." I nodded slowly. "Of course." A week later, a check arrived. It was less than a third of what we'd given her. Mark laid it on the counter like an offering. "This is it. For now." I stared at the check, the number written neatly across it, the insult of it. "That's all she's giving us?" I asked. "She says she needs the rest to start over." "And what about us?" I asked. "She's family," he said again, the phrase worn thin now, frayed. Something in me finally shifted. "I need you to listen to me," my voice said, steady but low. "What you did wasn't just about money. You broke something fundamental between us." He scoffed lightly. "You're overreacting." That word, overreacting. I picked up the check and held it between my fingers. "This," I said, "is what you think my trust is worth." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held a hand. "I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you, things are going to change." He looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was seeing a stranger. "What does that mean?" he asked. It meant everything. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not in anger, in preparation. I laid everything out, the transfer, the lies, the partial repayment. She listened without interrupting. When she finished, she said, "You have options." That was the first time I'd felt hope in weeks. I didn't file for divorce right away, not yet, but I did something else. I separated our finances. I moved my paycheck into a new account. I froze what I could. I documented everything, quietly, carefully. When Mark noticed, it was too late. "You don't trust me," he accused. "No," I said. "I don't." That night, he went to his mother's house. He didn't come home. The next day, Evelyn called me for the first time in years. "I hear you're making things difficult," she said. "I'm protecting myself," I replied. "You're tearing this family apart," she snapped. I smiled to myself. "No," I said, "I'm just refusing to hold it together by myself anymore." There was a pause on the line. Then she said something that finally revealed her completely. "You should be grateful he chose you at all." I hung up. Within a month, the truth began to ripple outward. Mark told his siblings his version. Evelyn told hers. But facts have a way of standing on their own when you let them. Questions were asked. Why hadn't she downsized instead of remodeling? Why had she taken money meant for retirement? Why had Mark lied? The answers didn't paint them kindly. Family gatherings grew tense. Invitations stopped coming. For them. And one evening, Mark came home and sat across from me at the same table where this had all begun. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said. "Neither did I replied. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had learned something important in those months. Love that asks you to disappear isn't love, and family that thrives on your silence isn't family at all." The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something collapses, dust still in the air, pieces not yet settled. Mark moved through the house like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome, careful with his words, careful with his tone, as if politeness might stitch something back together. It didn't. Word traveled faster than I expected, not because I spread it. I didn't have to. Evelyn had always enjoyed telling her side of things, and this time she told it loudly. She called relatives, old friends, anyone who would listen. According to her, I was ungrateful, cold, turning her son against her. According to her, I was obsessed with money. What she didn't expect was that people would ask questions, and what she definitely didn't expect was that I had receipts. It started with Mark's sister, Laura. She called me one afternoon, her voice cautious, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I hope it's okay I'm calling," she said. "It is," I replied. Mom told me some things, but they didn't sit right." I waited. "She said you refused to help her when she was desperate, but then I heard she remodeled the house before selling it." I closed my eyes, took a slow breath. "That's true." There was a pause. Then, "How much did she take from you?" I told her. Laura went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. "I didn't know. she said softly. After that, the questions multiplied, from cousins, from an aunt who'd always been polite but distant, from people who'd known Evelyn long enough to recognize a pattern when they saw one. Mark tried to manage it. He defended her, softened the edges, explained away the numbers, but explanations sound thin when facts are solid. One Sunday, he came home from his brother's house looking shaken. "He thinks Mom took advantage of us," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "They think?" He sank into a chair. "They're saying she should pay us back, all of it." "And what do you think?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. That told me everything. A week later, Evelyn showed up at our house unannounced. I heard the knock while I was folding laundry, 3 sharp raps, impatient, demanding. Mark was in the shower. I opened the door myself. She stood there in a tailored coat, chin lifted, eyes sharp. The same woman who once told me I should be grateful her son married beneath his potential. "We need to talk," she said, stepping forward. I didn't move aside. "Talk here," I said. Her lips tightened, but she nodded. "You've embarrassed me," she said without preamble. "You've turned my own family against me." "I told the truth," I replied. "You didn't have to air our business," she snapped. "Ours?" I asked calmly. "It was my money too." "You scoffed. You act like you're the only one who's sacrificed." I leaned against the doorframe. "What did you sacrifice, Evelyn?" Her eyes flashed. "I raised him. And I stood beside him for 26 years. She waved a hand dismissively. "This is between mother and son." "No," I said. "It stopped being that when you took what we needed to survive our future." She stepped closer. "If you push this any further, you'll regret it." I met her gaze. "I already regret trusting you." She left without another word. That night, Mark and I sat at the table again. It seemed to be the only place we ever really talked anymore. "She came by," I told him. He sighed. "I figured." "She threatened me." He looked up sharply. "She wouldn't." "She did. And I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because I refuse to disappear for the sake of your mother's comfort." He stared at his hands. "I didn't think she'd go this far," he admitted quietly. I nodded. "Neither did I. But here we are." A month later, the formal letter arrived. Not from Evelyn, from her lawyer. She was offering a settlement, a larger portion of what she owed us, paid back over time in exchange for no further action or public dispute. Mark read it twice, then slid it across the table to me. "She's scared," he said. I picked up the letter. The paper felt heavy, final. "She should be," I replied. We accepted the settlement, not because it made things right, but because it made things clear. She would pay back what she took, slowly, reluctantly, with conditions, but she would pay. The fallout didn't end there. Family gatherings changed. Some people chose sides, others chose distance. Evelyn stopped being invited to certain events. When she did attend, conversations went quiet around her, like people weren't sure which version of her they were allowed to acknowledge. Mark changed too. Not overnight, and not completely, but the blind devotion cracked. One evening, months later, he said something that surprised me. "I don't recognize her anymore," he said. I looked at him. "You do, you just didn't want to." He didn't argue. We went to counseling, not to save what we had, but to understand what we'd lost, to decide what, if anything, could be rebuilt. Some days felt hopeful, others felt like walking on glass. I learned to stop cushioning his discomfort. He learned, slowly, to sit with mine. And me? I felt stronger than I had in years, not because I'd won, but because I'd stopped losing myself. Money can be replaced, trust is harder, but dignity, once reclaimed, has a way of settling into your bones. The first payment arrived in early spring. A plain envelope, no note, no apology, just a check, written in Evelyn's tight, deliberate handwriting, like each stroke cost her something. I stared at it for a long time before depositing it. Not because I needed the money right away, we'd adjusted our lives by then, but because accepting it felt like closing a door I'd once hoped might stay open. Not to her, to the version of family I thought we had. Mark watched me from the kitchen doorway. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "Yes, I do," I replied. "For myself." I deposited the check that afternoon. Life didn't snap back into place after that. It reshaped itself slowly, awkwardly, like bones healing slightly crooked but strong enough to hold weight again. Mark and I continued counseling. Some sessions were calm, almost productive. Others left us sitting in silence afterward, driving home with the radio on low, both of us staring straight ahead like we were afraid to look at each other too closely. There were things he still didn't want to admit, that he'd enjoyed being needed by his mother, that he'd chosen the easier loyalty, that he'd gambled our future to avoid confronting her entitlement. But he stopped defending her. That mattered more than I expected. One evening, several months after the settlement, we were sitting on the back porch. The air smelled like cut grass and rain, the kind of evening that usually invites small talk. "I should have told you the truth," he said suddenly. I didn't look at him right away. I let the words land. "Yes," I said. "I was afraid you'd say no." "I might have, but at least I would have known who I was married to." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't know how to make it right." I finally turned to him. "You don't make it right by fixing her mess. You make it right by choosing me when it's uncomfortable." He took that in, slowly. Evelyn kept paying, on time, always through her lawyer. No calls, no visits, no attempts at reconciliation. I heard about her through other people. She complained that I'd changed, that marriage had ruined her son, that money had turned everyone greedy. But her voice carried less weight now. People had seen behind the curtain. The biggest shift came at a family gathering the following Thanksgiving. We debated going. In the end, we did. Evelyn was there. She sat stiffly at the far end of the table, smiling too tightly, laughing too loudly at jokes no one told. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a second before snapping back into place. I nodded politely. That was all. No confrontation, no drama, just distance. At one point, I excused myself to the kitchen to help clear plates. Laura joined me, rinsing dishes beside me. "I'm glad you stood up for yourself," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. I paused, a plate in my hands. "Thank you." "She's not used to being told no," Laura added. "I know," I said. Later, as Mark and I drove home, he stared out the window. "She didn't talk to you," he said. "She didn't need to," I replied. That winter, I made a decision that had nothing to do with Mark or Evelyn. I increased my hours at work and enrolled in a certification program I'd put off for years because it wasn't the right time. I started walking in the mornings again. I repainted the guest room in a soft blue I liked, not one Mark picked because it matched better. Small acts, but they added up. One night, as I balanced our now separate budget spreadsheets, Mark watched me from across the table. "You don't need to keep things split like this forever," he said. "I know," I replied, "but I need to know I can stand on my own." He nodded. No argument, no guilt. That was progress. The final payment came almost a year after the first. I deposited it without ceremony. When I came home, Mark asked, "Is that it?" "Yes," I said. "It's done." He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for months. We didn't celebrate. We sat quietly, the house settling around us, the clock ticking softly on the wall. Later that night, lying in bed, I realized something important. The betrayal hadn't just been about money, it had been about being expected to sacrifice quietly, to smooth things over, to carry the emotional weight while others benefited. And the healing hadn't come from winning, it came from refusing to carry what wasn't mine anymore. Mark and I are still together. Some people expect a dramatic ending, a divorce, a triumphant walk into the sunset. Life isn't always like that. Sometimes the victory is quieter. Sometimes it's learning to say no without apologizing. Sometimes it's being believed. Sometimes it's choosing yourself without burning everything down. I don't trust blindly anymore, but I trust myself. And that has made all the difference. Even after the final payment cleared, the aftermath lingered. That surprised me more than anything. I had thought closure would feel like a door slamming shut, final, decisive. Instead, it felt like standing in a room long after a storm had passed, surveying the water stains, the warped floorboards, the things that would never quite go back to how they were before. Mark tried in his own way to return to normal. He suggested weekend trips, cooked more, asked how my day was with a sincerity that hadn't been there in years. Sometimes it felt genuine. Other times it felt like penance. I didn't discourage him, but I didn't rush to meet him there either. Trust, once fractured, doesn't rebuild on effort alone. It rebuilds on consistency, on choices made when no one is watching. One evening, several weeks after the last check, Mark came home holding a familiar envelope, the same one where I used to keep our saving statements. "I thought maybe we could start again," he said, placing it on the table between us. I didn't open it. "Why?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because I don't want money to be the thing that separates us." I looked at him for a long moment. "Money wasn't the thing," I said quietly. "It was the secrecy, the assumption, the way my voice didn't matter until it was inconvenient to ignore." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I know," he said. "I'm trying to learn." I slid the envelope back toward him. "Then learn this first. I don't rebuild on your timeline." He accepted that, or at least he didn't argue. That was new. Around that time, my daughter called more often. She'd heard pieces of the story, carefully filtered, secondhand, but not for me directly. One night, she asked if she could come visit. She sat across from me on the couch, legs tucked under her, tea cooling in her hands. "Dad seems different," she said. "He is," I replied. "Are you okay?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "I am," I said honestly, "in ways I wasn't before." She studied my face, like she was trying to reconcile the mother she knew with the woman sitting in front of her. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. That meant more than she probably realized. Evelyn, on the other hand, retreated into herself. I didn't hear from her at all after the final payment, not a word, not even through Mark. At first, that silence felt heavy, unfinished. Then it felt like relief. One afternoon, months later, Mark told me she'd been asking about us, about me. "He wants to talk," he said. I folded the towel in my hands carefully before responding. "I'm not ready," I said. He nodded. "I told you that." That was another small shift, one I noticed. Counseling eventually slowed, then stopped, not because everything was fixed, but because we'd reached a place where the work had to happen in the quiet, ordinary moments. Who he defended when she criticized me, whether he checked with me before making decisions, how he spoke about money, whether my discomfort still got minimized. Some days were good, some days weren't, and I learned that both could exist without canceling each other out. I also learned something else. I liked the woman I was becoming. She was more careful with her energy, more selective with her compassion, less willing to explain herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. I stopped attending certain gatherings. I declined invitations that felt obligatory. I spent more time doing things that filled me instead of drained me. One Saturday morning, while sorting through old boxes in the garage, I found an album from early in our marriage. Photos of Mark and me, young, hopeful, arms wrapped around each other like the future was something guaranteed. I sat on the floor and flipped through it slowly. I didn't feel sad. I felt tender. We had been different people then, less tested, less aware. I closed the album and put it back, not as something to mourn, but as something that led me here. That night, Mark asked what I'd been doing all day. Remembering, I said. Good memories? He asked. Necessary ones, I replied. He smiled faintly. One evening, not long after, the phone rang. It was Evelyn. Mark was out. I answered before I could talk myself out of it. Yes, I said. Her voice sounded older, thinner. You finished your program, she said. I blinked, surprised. Yes, I did. That's good, she said, an awkward pause. I wanted to say, things didn't turn out the way I expected. I waited. I never meant to hurt you, she added. I closed my eyes. Intent and impact rarely meet where people hope they will. I believe you, I said carefully, but that doesn't change what happened. Another pause. I suppose not, she said. She didn't apologize, but she didn't accuse me either. It was the closest we'd come to honesty. When I hung up, I felt strangely calm, not triumphant, not vindicated, just done. Later that week, Mark asked how the call went. It went exactly as far as it could, I said. He nodded, understanding. We've learned to live with the truth now, that love doesn't excuse harm, that family doesn't get unlimited access to your life just because of blood, that sacrifice without consent is theft no matter how it's justified. Some people never learn that. I did. And while I wouldn't wish the journey on anyone, I don't regret where it led me. I gained something I didn't even know I was missing. My own voice, my own boundaries, my own sense of worth, untethered from anyone else's approval. And that, more than the money, is what I'll carry forward. Time did what it always does. It softened the sharpest edges, but it didn't erase the shape of what had happened. That turned out to be a gift. I stopped wanting things to go back to the way they were. I stopped measuring our marriage against an old version of us that no longer fit. Instead, I began paying attention to what existed now, without nostalgia clouding my judgment. Mark learned to pause before answering his mother's calls. Sometimes he let them go to voicemail. The first time I noticed that, my chest tightened, not with satisfaction, but with awareness. He was choosing differently. Not dramatically, not loudly, just differently. One night, as we washed dishes side by side, he said, "She asked me why I don't come by as much." I kept my eyes on the plate in my hands. "What did you say?" "That I'm busy," he replied. Then, after a beat, "and that some things need space." I nodded. That was enough. Evelyn didn't disappear from our lives entirely. She existed now in a smaller, quieter way, like a radio turned low in another room, present but no longer dominating the space. Occasionally, she tested the boundaries, a comment here, a guilt-laced remark there. "I suppose you're too busy for family now. I raised him better than this." But Mark didn't relay them to me the way he once would have. He filtered, he absorbed, he stopped expecting me to carry the emotional cleanup. That mattered. One afternoon, I ran into Evelyn unexpectedly at the grocery store. I was reaching for a loaf of bread when I heard her voice behind me. "Well," she said, "this is awkward." I turned. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, emotionally, less certain of her place. "Hello, Evelyn," I said. She studied my face like she was searching for something. Anger, triumph, regret. I offered none of it. I hear you're doing well, she said. I am, I replied. That program you took, Mark said you're moving up at work? Yes, I said again. She nodded slowly. Good for you. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't sharp either. I won't keep you, she said after a moment. I'm sure you're busy. I watched her walk away, cart squeaking slightly with each step. I felt nothing dramatic, just free. At home that evening, I told Mark about the encounter. He braced himself, waiting for impact. She was fine, I said. He exhaled. That's good. It is, I agreed, because fine meant neutral, and neutral meant power had shifted. As the months passed, my life filled with things that had nothing to do with them. I took on new responsibilities at work. I made friends with a woman in my program who laughed loudly and unapologetically. I learned how to sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it. Mark and I settled into a new rhythm. Not better, not worse, more honest. We talked about money openly now. Decisions were slower, conversations longer. Sometimes uncomfortable, but I never felt invisible again. One night, after a long conversation about finances, Mark said something that stayed with me. I didn't realize how much you'd been carrying, he said. I thought because you didn't complain, you were okay. I looked at him. I wasn't okay. I was conditioned. He nodded slowly. I don't want to be the reason you feel that way again. That was the closest thing to an apology I needed. Another year passed. The house felt different, lighter somehow. Not because the past had vanished, but because it no longer dictated the present. I repainted the kitchen, changed the curtains, cleared out drawers that had been left untouched for years. I let go of things I no longer needed to keep just in case. One afternoon, while sorting through paperwork, I came across the old bank statements, the ones before everything changed. I stared at the numbers for a long time. Then I shredded them. Mark watched from the doorway. You sure? He asked. Yes, I said, because holding on to proof of survival can quietly keep you living in survival mode. We visited Evelyn once that year, briefly, politely, on neutral ground. She spoke carefully, asked questions instead of making declarations, watched my face for cues she no longer controlled. When we left, Mark squeezed my hand in the car. Thank you, he said. For what? For not making me choose in a way that would have broken me. I thought about that for a moment. I didn't spare you, I just stopped breaking myself for you. He nodded. He understood the difference now. The strangest part of all of this is that I don't feel hardened. I feel clearer. I still believe in love. I still believe in family. I just believe in consent, honesty, and balance more. If I could speak to the woman I was before all of this, the one who hovered over a keyboard, finger trembling before clicking confirm, I wouldn't scold her. I'd tell her this. You weren't foolish. You were trusting, and trust is only a flaw in the hands of those who misuse it. I didn't lose everything. I gained discernment, and that has changed the way I move through the world, quietly, confidently, on my own terms. The season changed again without asking for permission. Spring slipped into summer, and the mornings grew brighter earlier than I expected. I started waking before the alarm, not because of worry, but because my body felt ready. That was new. For years, waking up had felt like bracing, like tightening something invisible before the day could get its hands on me. Now it felt like opening a window. I took my coffee out onto the porch most mornings. The chair creaked the same way it always had, but the air felt different against my skin. Warmer, less hurried. I watched the neighborhood wake up. Dog walkers, joggers, the school bus rumbling by, even though our children no longer needed it. I thought sometimes about how many versions of myself had lived in this house. The young woman who believed love meant flexibility. The wife who thought patience could fix anything. The woman who learned that silence has a cost. And the woman I was now, still gentle, still thoughtful, but no longer willing to be folded smaller for someone else's comfort. Mark noticed the change before I said anything about it. "You seem lighter," he said one morning, buttering toast. "I am," I replied. He smiled, but there was uncertainty in it. Change, even good change, can be unsettling when it shifts the balance you've grown used to. A few weeks later, his brother hosted a small family barbecue. Nothing formal, just burgers, lawn chairs, paper plates. Mark asked if I wanted to go. "You don't have to," he added quickly. "I know how those things can feel." I considered it. "I'll go," I said, "but we leave when I say." "Okay," he agreed, without hesitation. That, too, was new. Evelyn was there. She greeted us with a nod, a reserved smile. No comments, no barbs disguised as jokes. We existed in the same space like two people who'd agreed, silently, to respect the lines drawn between them. At one point, I overheard her telling someone about her fresh start, about how life teaches you lessons whether you want them or not. I didn't know if she was talking about me or herself. I didn't need to know. Later, as Mark and I drove home, he asked, "How are you feeling?" I checked in with myself before answering. "Steady," I said, and I meant it. That night, I slept deeply. No replaying conversations, no rehearsing boundaries, no scanning for the next emotional demand. Just rest. Months passed, then another year. Life continued in its quiet, unremarkable way until I realized how remarkable that was. My work became more fulfilling. I was trusted with decisions I'd once hesitated to voice opinions on. I stopped apologizing before speaking. People listened. At home, Mark and I found a rhythm that felt earned. Not romanticized, not idealized. Honest. We still disagreed, still misunderstood each other at times, but we didn't sweep things under the rug anymore. We addressed them before resentment could grow roots. One evening, while organizing old files, Mark found the original paperwork from the transfer, the one that had started it all. He held it in his hands like it might bite. "I forgot we kept this," he said. I looked at it briefly. "You can throw it away." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "It doesn't own us anymore." He tore it in half, then again, then dropped it in the trash. I watched the pieces settle. That felt like closure. Evelyn's health began to decline subtly after that. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of years. Mark mentioned it once, carefully. "I might need to help her more," he said. I looked at him. "How?" "Appointments, errands, things like that." I nodded. "That's reasonable." He waited, unsure. "As long as it doesn't come at the expense of us," I added. "It won't," he quickly said. Then slower, "I won't let it." I believed him, not because of his words, because of his track record. I didn't accompany him to those appointments. I didn't need to. That wasn't avoidance, it was choice. And choice feels very different. One afternoon, while cleaning out the linen closet, I found a small notebook tucked behind a stack of towels. I recognized it immediately. My old budgeting notebook. The one I used to track every expense down to the dollar. The one that had once felt like control, but now looked like fear in neat handwriting. I flipped through it slowly. So many adjustments, so many compromises, so many careful calculations to make sure everyone else stayed comfortable. I closed it and set it aside. Then I took out a new notebook. This one stayed mostly empty, not because I wasn't planning, but because I no longer felt the need to track my worth through numbers.
Mark noticed the new notebook on the counter later that night. "What's that for?" I asked. "Whatever comes next," I said. He smiled. I like that. I did too. Years from now, I may not remember every detail of how this all unfolded. I may forget the exact amount on the checks, the dates of the conversations, the precise words exchanged in anger or defense. But I will remember the feeling of sitting in my car staring at a house that told me I'd been lied to. And I will remember what I chose to do with that knowledge. I didn't scream. I didn't destroy. I didn't disappear. I adjusted my posture in my own life, and everything shifted accordingly. Some lessons arrive wrapped in loss. Others arrive disguised as obligation. But the ones that stay, the ones that shape you, are the ones that teach you how to stand without shrinking. I stand now, not rigid, not resentful, just rooted. And that is enough.
There was a moment, not long after all of this, when I realized I had stopped bracing for impact. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I was standing in the kitchen rinsing a coffee mug when Mark walked in and said, "I need to tell you something." His tone was calm, neutral, not heavy, not defensive. My body didn't tense. That alone told me how far I'd come. "What is it?" I asked. Mom wants to sell the condo she moved into," he said. "She asked if I thought it was a good idea." I turned off the faucet and dried my hands. "And what did you say?" "That it's her decision," he replied, "and that I wouldn't be involved financially." There it was. No argument, no justification, no expectation that I would reassure him. Just a boundary, clearly stated. I nodded. "That sounds reasonable." He looked at me, searching my face. "You're okay with that?" "Yes," I said, "because you handled it." He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. That night, after dinner, I sat alone in the living room with the lamp on low. The house was quiet. Mark had gone to bed early. I stayed up, flipping through a book without really reading it. I thought about how many years I'd lived in anticipation of other people's needs, how often I'd adjusted before anyone even asked, how natural that had once felt, and how unnatural it feels now. Not because I'm harder, because I'm honest. The following month, my son came to visit. He stayed for the weekend, sleeping in his old room, commenting on how small the house felt now that he'd been gone so long. We sat at the kitchen table one evening, eating leftovers, the kind of meal that invites conversation. "Dad mentioned some stuff," he said carefully, "about Grandma and the money." I waited. "I just wanted to ask, are you okay?" he said. I smiled at him, really smiled. "I am," I said, "better than okay." He studied me. "You seem different." "I am," I replied, "but in a good way." He nodded. "I'm glad." That was all he needed to say. I didn't explain, I didn't justify, I didn't unload. I trusted that my steadiness spoke for itself. Later that weekend, I overheard him on the phone with his sister. "Mom's fine," he said. "She's actually really strong." I pretended not to hear. Some truths don't need acknowledgement to feel real. As time went on, I noticed something else changing, not just in my marriage, but in how others interacted with me. People listened when I spoke. They asked instead of assumed. They didn't push when I said no. It wasn't because they'd suddenly become more considerate. It was because I had. Boundaries don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves through consistency. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. We hadn't seen each other in years. We chatted near the produce section, catching up in that surface-level way people do when they don't yet know what version of you they're meeting. "How's married life?" she asked casually. I considered the question. "It's honest," I said finally. She laughed lightly. "That's a new one." It is, I agreed. Later, pushing my cart down the aisle, I realized how rare it is for women my age to answer questions like that truthfully, how often we're expected to present endurance as success. I didn't want that anymore. Mark and I had another conversation a few weeks later, one that might have gone very differently years ago. He was offered a job opportunity in another city, better pay, more responsibility, a chance to start fresh, as he put it. We sat across from each other at the table, papers spread between us. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think we need to talk about it," I said. "Not just the money, the life." He nodded. "Of course." We talked for hours about my work, about what I wanted, about what I didn't want to repeat. At one point he said, "I would have just assumed we'd go before." I met his eyes. "I know." "And now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "we decide together." In the end, he declined the offer, not because I asked him to, because it didn't fit the life we were building. That mattered. Evelyn's presence continued to fade into the background, not in a dramatic way, but in a natural one. Age has a way of shrinking the spaces people once dominated. When Mark visited her, he came home quieter, thoughtful. "She talks a lot about the past," he said once, "about how things used to be." I nodded. "That's common." "She doesn't talk much about the future," he added. I didn't respond. Not every observation needs commentary. There was a day, maybe 2 years after everything began, when I drove past her old house again, the one with the white fence, the manicured lawn. It looked different now. The grass was overgrown, the paint chipped, the fence leaned. New owners, I assumed. New story. I didn't stop. I didn't feel pulled towards it. I just kept driving. That, to me, felt like the clearest sign of healing. Because the house no longer symbolized betrayal. It was just a house again. One evening, as Mark and I prepared dinner together, he said something quietly, almost to himself. "I wish I'd listened sooner." I didn't correct him. I didn't comfort him either. Regret is his to carry. I've carried enough for a lifetime. What I carry now is lighter. Awareness, choice, self-trust. Those things don't make life easier. They make it clearer. And clarity, I've learned, is worth more than comfort built on silence. The woman I am now doesn't rush to prove her goodness. She doesn't sacrifice invisibly. She doesn't confuse loyalty with self-erasure. She stands in her life, present, awake, unafraid of what happens when she tells the truth. And that truth, once spoken, has a way of reshaping everything around it, quietly, irreversibly. There came a point when I stopped thinking of the story as something that had happened to me. It became something that had happened through me. That distinction mattered more than I expected. I noticed it one morning while reorganizing the hall closet. I was sorting coats by season, something I'd done dozens of times before, when I realized I wasn't replaying old conversations in my head. I wasn't rehearsing arguments that would never happen again. I wasn't scanning my memory for loose ends. I was just folding, living, present. The past had finally loosened its grip. Mark and I had settled into a way of being that felt grounded, not romanticized, not fragile. We respected each other's rhythms now. If I needed space, I took it. If he needed reassurance, he asked, without expectation, without entitlement. One evening, while we were cooking dinner, he reached for a spice jar and paused. "Do you mind if I invite my sister over next weekend?" he asked. "Just her, no mom." I considered it. "That's fine," I said. He nodded, relieved, not because I said yes, but because I felt free to say no if I needed to. Laura came by the following Saturday. We talked easily, comfortably. She thanked me at one point, Not dramatically, just honestly. For standing your ground, she said. It made things clearer for all of us. I didn't deflect. I didn't minimize. You're welcome, I replied. That was new too. Clarity spread in quiet ways. I became more direct at work. When a colleague tried to pass off extra tasks as team effort, I said no without softening it into apology. When my supervisor asked for my input, I gave it plainly. People adjusted. Not everyone liked it, but I didn't need them to. At home, Mark noticed the shift and adapted rather than resisted. He no longer spoke for me in conversations. He didn't assume my agreement. He asked. That alone changed the air between us. We weren't perfect. We still had moments. Old habits don't vanish without protest. Sometimes he'd slip into defensiveness. Sometimes I'd retreat instead of engaging. But we named it now, and naming something has a way of shrinking it. Evelyn remained distant. Occasionally, Mark mentioned her health in passing. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic. She's slowing down, he said once. That happens, I replied. He watched me carefully, waiting for something. Sympathy, guilt, obligation? He found none. Not because I was unkind, because I had learned the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer in the living room, I found an old envelope with Evelyn's handwriting on it. Inside was a thank you card from years earlier, one of the few she'd ever sent. The words were stiff, formal, dutiful. I read it once. Then I threw it away. It wasn't anger that guided my hand. It was discernment. Some things don't deserve preservation simply because they're old. The seasons turned again. Leaves fell, then snow came, then thawed. Life continued in its quiet, relentless way. And one day, without ceremony, I realized I had stopped defining my life in relation to what had happened. I wasn't the woman who'd been betrayed. I was the woman who'd responded. That difference shifted everything. Mark and I talked one night about the future, not in grand plans, but in gentle possibilities. Travel, downsizing someday, what we wanted our later years to feel like. Peaceful, I said. Honest, he added. We agreed on that much. He reached for my hand and I let him, not out of obligation, out of choice. Trust didn't return all at once. It rebuilt in layers, thin at first, then stronger. Not blind, not naive, informed. That kind of trust feels different in the body, less fluttering, more steady. I didn't mistake it for certainty. I understood now that certainty is an illusion we cling to when we're afraid of discomfort. I wasn't afraid anymore. One quiet afternoon, I found myself driving again. No destination in mind, just motion. I passed streets I hadn't driven down in years, old landmarks, old routines. At a stoplight, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked calm. Not younger, not untouched, but whole. The light turned green. I drove on. I didn't need to look back because the story wasn't something chasing me anymore. It was something I had already walked through, step by step, with eyes open, spine straight, and voice intact. And that, I knew, would carry me forward into whatever came next, quietly, intentionally, on my own terms.